It's undisputed that Shadow of the Beast is one of the most famous games for the Commodore Amiga, which was developed by Reflections in 1989 and published by that awesome company that produced some of the best artworks for its packaging. That was indeed Psygnosis. Now, if you were anything like me, which is highly likely, artwork, especially science fiction and fantasy based, had a massive appeal to me, like it still does. And games by Psygnosis were really something else that were unique to them. The cover art for Agony, Blood Money and Orc were outstanding art pieces in their own right through their attention to fine detail in colours used. Remember, this was an era where most box covers were really bright and basic in comparison to these. Shadow of the Beast and its two original sequels were no exception. These covers represented an almost doom and gloomy aesthetic compared to what most publishers were putting on their boxes at the time. So the game itself, just like the packaging, we are greeted with a fairly obscure game. The most standout feature, of course, is the impressive parallax scrolling, where several layers are pretty much moving at different speeds simultaneously. If you look carefully as you are out on the plains on the first part of the game, you will soon realise how truly great this game is. Shadow of the Beast was a technical achievement for the Commodore Amiga, features some of the best visuals, some of the best music, and delivered a great fusion of science fiction, fantasy, horror, adventure, and action all in one package. A fairly challenging game. Many will argue it's more of a demo or a tech demo to show off the Amiga's capabilities. I beg to differ, it's a great game with several versions released after this one arrived. So today we are checking out all the different ports of Shadow of the Beast and looking for the very next best thing to the original game. Gremlin Graphics published a ZX Spectrum conversion in 1990. As many of you will know, 8-bit systems had to make many cutbacks from 16-bit systems. Remarkably, the ZX Spectrum conversion works perfectly. I was honestly expecting it to be very slow, but it handles great. Super smooth gameplay. Now, of course, those most famous features of the Amiga game aren't going to be perfect on the ZX Spectrum. Of course, that's the very impressive parallax scrolling. Now, given the Spectrum its due, as I am running outside on the plains, we can see that the distant background is moving along with the fences at the front and the layer which you are running on. Okay, not to the caliber of the Commodore Amiga's version, but this doesn't look bad for what it's being powered on. In terms of music, we have an 8-bit rendition here, and it actually sounds pretty good too with its combined sound effects of punching and kicking. Now, once we enter the first main part of the game inside the tree, we don't get a 3D scrolling effect here at all, as we have no background imagery, just a static dark light purple background. In terms of sprites, these are actually nicely drawn with Spectrum's version. Once we make it to grab our shooting ability, I was fairly impressed with how the Keeper of the Orb looked while shooting flames from its mouth. I then went to take on the Death Skeleton and was again surprised with how fluid the game was and played. Of course, the ZX Spectrum's version is nowhere near the quality of the original Amiga game, but yet this is really nicely coded. One off-putting thing with this version is the loading. Now, in the UK, cassette tapes were the dominant media at the time, so this couldn't be helped. This Amstrad CPC's Gremlin Graphics 1990 release is actually really good for an 8-bit computer attempt of Shadow of the Beast. Sure, this version does feel a little on the sluggish side at certain places in the game, but when this isn't happening, it flows so nicely. Now, 128K Amstrad users also had the option of music here, and yet it's a lovely 8-bit rendition. Of course, we have cutbacks, which is common for 8-bit systems, so we have no clouds out on the plains at all with this release. The colours used are a little strange too during these segments of the game, but once I entered the stage inside of the tree, I was pleasantly surprised with how well this actually plays. Faithful to the Amiga's original game, when we hit enemies they sink into the ground, whereas many versions seen enemies fly away after you hit them. Of course, we don't have parallax scrolling or wooded imagery in the background here, but it manages to pull it off so well all considering. The Keeper of the Orb is nicely designed here too. Hit collision detection is fairly good here. The Death Skeleton looks really nice. Of course, everything is scaled down here like the ZX Spectrum's version, but all in all, really, this is a great, solid, and highly polished port. I did kind of find the snakes on the gameplay's border a little bit lame, but nevertheless, I enjoyed my time with this Amstrad CPC release. The strange thing with the 1991 Tech Magic port of Shadow of the Beast for the Sega Master System is that there is some strange differences compared to the original Amiga game. Firstly, instead of gaining entrance to the tree by just walking inside, this version had me baffled. I pressed up at the door, Beast doesn't enter. I press a couple of key combinations and still nothing. I walk to the left side of the entrance to find the key placed. I can then gain entry. As I am doing this, I also realise that this version has an inventory menu too, where you can hold up to 8 items at a time. Some say this was an enhanced version for the Master System because of features like this. This version also has a beating heart which indicates health. Something else here is that when the beast dies, it's not a case of going straight back to the start of the game. We actually have lives here, which places us back to nearby where we died from. It of course has parallel scrolling, which is okay, but there is much better to come in terms of the famous element which makes Shadow of the Beast so iconic. The music isn't too bad. I got the impression that Tech Magic were attempting to give this version an almost photorealistic look for Beast in an 8-bit console way, that is. One feature I did particularly like here is little bits of narrative in the game and how it names particular enemies and orbs. Overall, not a bad port, just a little bit different to every other version here. Now, I will be honest, considering the Commodore Amiga's game was truly something to make Atari ST fans want to switch to the Amiga, I was kind of hoping that the Atari ST conversion, releasing back in 1990 by Psygnosis, was going to be just as impressive visually, but it really isn't, and I was kind of pretty disappointed with how basic this version was. Its frame rate issues start from scratch out on the planes, and it really feels at this point that the ST simply wasn't strong enough to handle so much going on. Color wise, it's okay. Colors do look washed out a touch compared to the original Amiga game. There is no music, again something which the Amiga game was praised for. The parallax scrolling just isn't much to boast about at all here. The Beast has a brownish dark green look, and the beautiful backgrounds in the tree stage has been replaced by really ugly array of red colors used. It's just not a great version at all. I have seen better 8-bit computer versions of this game. The only parts of the Atari ST's version that I would say look good is the introduction screen and storyline artwork, which do admittedly look really nice and detailed. We don't even have the air balloon in the sky's background out on the plains with this version. Now, firstly, just like most other versions of Shadow of the Beast, I totally suck at this Atari Lynx 1992 conversion by Atari, as the gameplay will show you. So, is this a good version? It certainly is a great version for sure. Just like the Sega Master System's version, this port is much more different though, by adding different things to the game. So let's start then with the all-important parallax scrolling. Yes, this looks pretty amazing on the Atari Lynx. I could easily give the Game Gear a run for its money. We have a few layers here that scroll nicely. Now, where this version differs from the source material is several things, notably how things are laid out in particular areas. As you will see in the gameplay video, we have rotating platforms to jump on, new monsters included here too. The Keeper of the Orb looks really nicely drawn here, and oddly enough, Death Skeleton has actually been changed entirely. We also have a continuation system here, so once we die, it's not an instant game over. Sprites on the Atari Lynx version look awesome. Sure, they don't drop down into the ground when hit, but regardless, let's remind ourselves that this is a portable version. The colours used here are nice and bright, although not bright and colourful enough that it takes the dark aesthetic away from it. This is a seriously great port, and with some practice I could get a little further with this one over time. The Commodore 64's 1990 Ocean version is a fairly tough version of this game, although this has many achievements in its own right with its several layers of complex parallax scrolling, all at different speeds, and it looks like a highly polished production for sure. The game is challenging to say the least, like I say. This release came out on cartridge and disc originally, and of course this was an instant load for cartridge users, and played a little smoother on cartridge too. We have the choice here of sound effects or music only during gameplay. I must say that the quality of music here is extremely well done. One standout difference with this version is the black background as we travel across the plains. We also have some added challenges of enemies in this version, such as random bouncing things which wouldn't necessarily in other versions. I did honestly find this version a little stiff to control the beast compared with other versions. Sprites themselves as we enter inside the tree are really nicely done here too. Larger than your average Commodore 64 game, in which this version was actually praised for. When it comes to collecting the shooting power from the Keeper of the Orb, again this is extremely well done. Although there's a slight pause before entering areas with very large enemies, the game suffers no frame rate issues and no sprite flicker either. If you do not like Shadow the Beast, which is admittedly a little bit like Marmite, you like it or you don't, you can surely appreciate the C64's conversion on the technical side of things. I mean, the parallax scrolling alone on this version is comparable to several layers used on the Amiga version, a truly commendable attempt. The Japanese market even had a version of Shadow the Beast. Some will say that this shared assets from the PC Engine CD version, such as art and audio samples. Visually, this 1992 release by Victor Interactive Software is stunning, or at least just as good, if not an enhanced look to the Amiga's original game. Some differences here which are noticeable is that rather than enemies dropping to the ground or even flying away as the beast punches them, this has been replaced by explosions. There is some parallax scrolling here, but nothing to the magnitude of the Commodore Amiga's game. The 3D effect here isn't as stunning. Before entering inside of the tree, we are greeted with a rather awesome cutscene of Beast running down the staircase before the stage begins, which looks really cool and adds that little bit more to the game and makes it feel a little bit more substantial. Regretfully, the game does suffer from time to time with flickering for sprites. The Beast also has a slight delay when ducking, which can be annoying, even more so if you're as terrible at this game as I am. Punching repeatedly doesn't always work either. I think once adjusting to these control issues, this could be a very good version of Shadow the Beast to play. The music is different, but it's also excellent, and of course was produced on CD, which enriches the overall sound. Lastly, there is a totally awesome introduction cutscene here too. The Sega Mega Drive's 1991 Electronic Arts port is fantastic. Let's talk about parallax scrolling firstly. This version, just like Amiga's game, has several layers moving independently here, and the colours used outside on the planes are really nicely done too. But the turquoise colour complements everything so well here and really makes those scrolling clouds pop out at you. We also have the air balloon here in the sky's distance, which also moves too. Although I am bad at this game, as we know, that's a fact, it does control well, where many other conversions often felt a little wooden or stiff to control. The music here is superb too. We have an almost medieval sound to it, which adds to the intrigue of Shadow the Beast. For those like myself who prefers it when enemies sink into the ground, then that doesn't happen with this version. I do think it's the case of not having enough space whilst coding it potentially, but perhaps EA just wanted to make it look a little more modern, who knows. The trees in the background look awesome here too, no sprite flicker and no slowdowns. This version is known to be a particular tough one though. The thing is with Shadow of the Beast is precise timing and precision when attacking enemies is crucial. Otherwise you end up like my plane and constantly get hit around. All in all, not as beautiful looking as the Amiga game, but this is still a fairly exceptional attempt to bring the Beast to the 16-bit console era. For those of you who wasn't aware, the Super NES was due to have its own version of the game, which was actually going to be called Super Shadow of the Beast, and this was known around 1992 as it was talked about during the summer CES convention. Sadly though, the game never materialised, and somebody leaked a prototype of it back in 1993. The game was being produced by a company by the name of IGS. The gameplay is smooth enough and is pretty much a modern version of a game which was a few years old at this point. It's pretty much a standard thing to say, but this is actually another fairly challenging version of Shadow of the Beast. It wasn't to be a straightforward conversion, as this one does differ with particular elements. Of course, this was only a prototype, so for what this was going to become if it released and had a final version is anybody's guess. And my personal favourite version of Shadow of the Beast, right next to the original Commodore Amiga game, goes to the PC Engine CDs conversion. This one released in 1992 by Psygnosis. Now the strange thing is that although this contains cutscenes much like the FM Towns version, these on this platform aren't as great as the FM Towns version. However, the gameplay most certainly is, as well as the general look of it, with its use of colours and superb CD quality sound, with great music production and sound effects here which really pop out at you when you're punching things. Many versions of the game featured a very unfair challenge with pretty much everything out to deplete life from you. It's kind of like this version took away those bits and pieces and presented the player with a much more fairer challenge. It's extremely responsive to play and, dare I say it, more responsive than the Mega Drive's version. Oh, that's going to be controversial. Standout features here include the lovely bright flames that light up caves, and the eyes in the background which pop out and then disappear. Sprites here are nicely done and larger enemies are absolutely incredible. The PC Engine CD had a very smooth version of this game. Of course, I will favour Amiga with the Ultimate version, but right next to it, I would happily say that this was the next best thing to it. Of course, we had a remake of Shadow of the Beast during the PlayStation 4 era, which was also very good, but also too modern looking for this video. And that's it for ranking the various different ports of Shadow of the Beast. So, which version did you grow up on? As you can see in this video, there wasn't particularly a really awful version of this, not really compared with some ports of games on different platforms. So anyways, which version did you play growing up? Let us know in the comments, because I always like to hear people's own stories on it. Would you have personally ranked the PC Engine CD version in first place, or would you have given it to the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis? Anyways, until next video comes, thanks for watching.